In June of 1969, a 6-year-old boy stepped into a stand of trees on the high spine of the Great Smoky Mountains. He was 4 feet tall and 55 pounds, in a bright red shirt his father could pick out at a distance. He walked off to circle around and surprise the others. 3 minutes later, the other boys jumped out laughing. He did not. He was never seen again. In October of 1976, a 16-year-old girl walked a marked trail near the highest point in that same park, surrounded by 40 classmates and 1 teacher. She was last seen half a mile from the parking lot, moving a little ahead of the group in a hurry to reach the bus. The bus left without her. No one has found her since. In September of 1981, a 58-year-old woman hiked an easy trail at Deep Creek with 2 friends who knew her well. She walked over a low rise and out of their sight for a moment. When they came over that same rise, she was gone. No scream, no struggle, no sign she had left the path. The mountain simply closed behind her. And in March of 2012, a careful, dependable young man drove up to a gap on the Crest Road, left almost everything he had bought to survive in his car, and walked into the trees alone. The only thing he took with him was a note he left behind that told everyone not to follow. 4 people, a child, a teenager, a grown woman, a young man. More than 4 decades between the first and the last, and every one of them disappeared on the same 40-mile ridgeline of a single national park, most of them in the same narrow window. The minute or two when no one happened to be watching. No bodies. In most of these cases, no usable trail at all. Just people who were there and then were not. This is the most visited national park in the United States. Roughly 13 million people walk its trails every year. It is well mapped, heavily patrolled, crossed by paved roads and crowded overlooks. Vanishing without a trace in a place like this should be harder than vanishing in true backcountry, not easier. And yet it keeps happening in the same kind of terrain, in the same kind of weather, in a way the official record has never been able to close. What did these people have in common? That is the question this whole story turns on, and the honest answer is uncomfortable, because it does not point at a single kidnapper or killer or theory. It points at the land itself, at the fog these mountains are named for, and at a set of warnings about this exact ground that are older than the park, older than the maps, older than the country that drew them. I have spent a long time with these cases, longer than is probably healthy, and the thing that pulled me in was not the strangeness of any single one of them, because any single disappearance on its own has a mundane explanation waiting in the wings. People fall, people get lost, people sometimes choose to go.
What pulled me in was the pattern, the way the same handful of details keep surfacing across decades and across victims who have nothing else in common, except the same ridge, the same fog, and the same unobserved minute. And underneath all of it, running back centuries, the same set of stories from the people who were here first, telling us, in fact, that this was always going to happen, and exactly why. Before we continue, make sure you are subscribed and let us know where you are watching from.
Start with the ground, because the ground is the one witness present in every one of these cases. The Great Smoky Mountains National Park covers more than 522,000 acres along the border between Tennessee and North Carolina. The Appalachian Trail runs the length of its crest. On the Tennessee side sits Cades Cove, a broad green valley ringed by peaks, and the old resort area of Elkmont. Up on the spine is Clingman's Dome, the highest point in the park, with an observation tower you can drive most of the way to. On the North Carolina side, the land falls away into drainages like Deep Creek, and the Okonalufti, down toward the towns of Bryson City and Cherokee. Newfound Gap is the saddle where the main road crosses the crest between the two states. These are not abstractions. You can drive to every one of them. Local people have for generations. That matters because the people who catch the errors in a story like this are the ones who know the roads. And then there is the fog. The mountains are called Smoky for a reason. A blue-gray haze rises off the forest, pools in the valleys, and sweeps across the high balls with almost no warning. It is beautiful from an overlook. It is something else when you are standing inside it, and the world shrinks to 10 feet in every direction. The fog is not a detail in these cases. In more than one of them, it is the reason the search failed. It steals visibility, and it ruins scent, and it turns familiar ground into a place where a person 50 yards away might as well be on the far side of the moon. And it is not occasional. These are among the wettest mountains in the country outside the Pacific Northwest. The high peaks catch and hold moisture. The forest exhales it, and the result is a near-permanent veil that can drop over a bald in minutes and lift again before a search plane can scramble. Every one of the cases I am going to tell you involves it. In one, the rain and fog came in within the hour and washed out the trail before dogs could work. In another, fog grounded the helicopters when minutes mattered most. In a third, the weather was already dark and wet when the victim was last seen. The fog is not the backdrop to these stories. It is closer to a character in them. Long before any of this was a park, before the maps and the trails and the tower, this was Cherokee land. It was lived on, hunted across, and named ridge by ridge for thousands of years. And the people who named it left behind an account of what they believed lived up here. We know that account in detail because of one man. His name was James Mooney. He was an ethnographer who came into these mountains in the 1880s and recorded the stories of Eastern and Western Cherokee narrators directly, in their own telling. He published them in 1900 in a volume called Myths of the Cherokee. It is not a collection of campfire tales. It is fieldwork, written down from named sources, and it is still the single most important record of what the people of these mountains said about them. Throughout this story, when I tell you what the Cherokee said about this ground, that is where it comes from, not rumor. The people who are here first, written down before the park existed. Keep that in mind, because the warnings in Mooney's pages describe the same ridges where, decades later, people would begin to disappear. June 14th, 1969, Father's Day weekend. Dennis Lloyd Martin was 6 years old, 6 days short of his 7th birthday. He had come up into the mountains on a camping trip with his father, Bill, his grandfather, Clyde, and his 9-year-old brother, Douglas. They spent the night in a shelter and hiked out to Spence Field, a grassy bald that sits right on the Appalachian Trail in the Cades Cove sub-district. There is a detail here that sounds invented but is fully documented. A second, unrelated family, also named Martin, was camped in the same area, and their children had overlapping first names. 2 sets of Martins, similar ages, the same afternoon. It would tangle the early accounts badly. In the late afternoon, the boys decided to play a prank on the adults. They split into 2 groups to sneak up from different directions. Dennis went off on his own to circle around. He headed north into steeper ground. His father watched him go. There was nothing alarming about it. The woods were familiar, the distance was short, and he was a quiet, careful boy. The other boys popped out and startled the grown-ups. Dennis did not appear. His father later said only 3 to 5 minutes passed before he began to worry. That is the entire window. 3 to 5 minutes in clear sight of the spot where he was last seen, and a 6-year-old in a bright red shirt was simply gone. Then the weather turned. Heavy rain moved in not long after Dennis vanished. By the time rangers were notified, around 8:30 that evening, he had been missing for 4 hours, and the rain was already washing the mountainside. It took with it whatever tracks he had left and whatever scent a dog could have followed. And here the record contains a quiet, official admission. When park officials reviewed the search afterward, they noted that scent dogs should have been put on the ground anyway, because if Dennis was still moving after the rain passed, he would have been laying down a brand new trail the entire time. The dogs were not used early. That decision haunts the file. What followed became the largest search in the history of the park. At its peak, roughly 1,400 people were combing a 56 square mile area. Boy Scouts, sheriff's deputies, firefighters, hiking clubs, the National Guard, and a contingent of Green Berets. 2 Huey helicopters were sent from an Air Force base in Georgia, and it found almost nothing. Years later, the park's own emergency manager would put it plainly. The lesson of Dennis Martin, she said, was that more people is not the answer, because that many bodies on the ground trampled the very evidence a trained searcher might have read. Think about the timeline for a moment, because it is its own small horror. A child goes missing at 4:30 in the afternoon. The father waits 3 to 5 minutes, then begins to search the immediate area himself, calling, certain the boy is just behind the next stand of trees. The grandfather hikes down the Anthony Creek Trail to raise the alarm. Rangers are not notified until 8:30 that night, 4 hours later, and by then the rain is coming down hard on the High Bald. The first organized crew, only 30 men, did not start working in earnest until the next morning. By 1 o'clock the following afternoon, the search had swollen to more than 200 people. Within days, it was thousands, drawn from across the region, many with no training, all of them walking the same ground the evidence was on. And in the middle of all that motion and noise and helicopter wash, nothing. Not a scrap of red shirt, not a shoe, not a sound. A 6-year-old does not simply evaporate, and yet the most exhaustive search the park had ever mounted produced, in the immediate area, precisely nothing. There are 2 more documented details, and they are the ones that keep this case awake at night. The first, about a week after Dennis disappeared, a state highway engineer named Harold Key came forward. He said that on the afternoon the boy went missing, while he was in the Cades Cove area several miles from Spence Field, he heard a sharp, high-pitched scream. He went toward it. He said he saw a rough-looking man with long hair moving quickly through the woods toward a parked white sedan, and that there was a piece of paper on the ground that looked like a crude map. By the time anyone tried to follow up, the car was gone. I want to be careful here, because the record is careful here. Investigators questioned Key's account. The distance and the timing between Spence Field and where he stood did not fit easily together. It has never been confirmed, and it has never been dismissed. It just sits in the file, a loose thread no one could pull. The second detail is colder, and it is not in dispute. Sometime later, a child's Oxford-style shoe print, matching the type and size of what Dennis was wearing, was found near West Prong, miles from where he disappeared. Investigators did not examine it closely. The reason given was that the area had already been searched. A print of the right size, the right kind of shoe, in a place a 6-year-old should never have reached on his own, and it was noted and set aside.
Here is the part I can't get past. In 2022, a researcher finally pried the case file loose. The FBI had denied his request 3 separate times before they released it. 3 denials on a missing 6-year-old from 1969. I'm not telling you what it means. I'm asking why it took that long. To understand why the people who lived here longest were not surprised by a child vanishing on that ridge, you have to know what they said walked it.
In Mooney's record, there is a figure the Cherokee called Utlunta. The name is usually translated as the one with the pointed spear. She appears in the tellings Mooney collected as an old woman, but that is a disguise because she is a shapeshifter. Her skin is stone. Arrows shatter against it and fall away. On her right hand, she has a single finger like a knife or a spear or a blade of obsidian, and she uses it to kill. She has a second name as well, recorded in the same pages, Nunnehi, which means stone dress. For that hide of rock no weapon could break. In English, she is remembered simply as Spearfinger. Now hold the geography against the cases. Mooney's narrators place her along Chilhowee Mountain and the Little Tennessee River, ranging across the Nantahala passes and the high ridges, with Whiteside Mountain in Jackson County remembered as one of her haunts. That is the same ridge system, the same crest country, where these disappearances would later cluster. And there is one detail in the old account that should make the hair stand up on your arms, because it is the same detail that broke the search for Dennis Martin. The stories say Spearfinger used the fog. She moved inside the swirling smoke that pooled in these valleys, the very haze that gives the mountains their name, and used it as cover to come close. The thing the Cherokee warned about hunted in the exact conditions that, centuries later, erased a 6-year-old's trail. I am not telling you Spearfinger took Dennis Martin. I want to be clear about that. What I am telling you is that the people who knew this ground before anyone else built their warnings around a figure that hid in the fog on these particular ridges, and that the fog is real, and that it is still the thing that defeats every search up here. You can decide for yourself what to do with that. And this figure is not one storyteller's invention. Before Mooney ever wrote her down, a travel book from 1883 by Wilbur Ziegler and Ben Groskup, called The Heart of the Alleghenies, recorded a tale from these same mountains. It described a cave-dwelling creature that arrows could not pierce, that spread a wasting sickness, and that could only be killed by striking a single finger. 2 separate records, years apart, describing the same impossible thing in the same range. That does not make it real. It makes it old and consistent and harder to wave away than one campfire story. And Spearfinger is not the only thing Mooney's narrators said was hidden in this high country. There is a place in these mountains, they told him, called Atagahi. It is an enchanted lake, somewhere in the wildest depths of the Smokies, westward from the headwaters of the Oconaluftee River. And the defining feature of Atagahi in the Cherokee account is this: although all the Cherokee know that it is there, no one has ever seen it. The way to it is so difficult that only the animals know how to reach it. A stray hunter who came near would know it only by the whirring sound of thousands of wild ducks flying about the water. But if he reached the spot itself, he would find nothing. A dry, flat place, without a bird or an animal or a single blade of grass. Unless, the story says, he had first sharpened his spiritual vision by prayer and fasting and an all-night vigil. Only then would the water appear. And because no one sees it, some people think the lake dried up long ago. The Cherokee say this is not true. It is simply hidden. Hold that idea in your mind, because it is a strange and specific one. A place that is really there, that everyone knows is there, that cannot be found by ordinary sight, in the wildest depths of these exact mountains. The people who lived here did not picture this terrain the way we do, as a finite thing you could map and walk and account for. They pictured it as a place with rooms in it you could not enter, water you could not see, ground that was present and absent at the same time. October 8, 1976, 7 years and a few months after Dennis Martin, Teresa Lynn Gibson, called Trenny, was a 16-year-old sophomore at Bearden High School in Knoxville. That Friday, she boarded a bus with around 40 classmates for a horticulture field trip led by their teacher, Wayne Dunlap. The destination had been kept secret to build excitement. It turned out to be the high country near Clingman's Dome. The weather was poor, dark, rainy, foggy, but the trip went ahead. At the parking lot, the students got their instructions. Hike the Forney Ridge Trail out to Andrews Bald. Look at the plants, stay on the trail, do not go past the bald, and be back at the bus by 3:30. It is a moderate hike, about 3.5 miles round trip. Trenny left her coat and her purse on the bus and took only her lunch. She hiked out with a boy named Robert Simpson, a friend of her older brother. They reached Andrews Bald around 1:30, ate lunch, and she borrowed his jacket against the cold. On the way back, the two of them separated when Robert stopped to follow a bear he had spotted. After that, several classmates saw Trenny on the trail. She was moving a little apart from the others, sometimes ahead, sometimes behind, stopping now and then to look at plants, which was, after all, the point of the trip. One group stopped to rest and said Trenny went on without them, seeming to be in a hurry to get back. That was the last confirmed sighting. She was roughly half a mile from the parking area. The time was around 10 minutes to 3. At 3:30, the group reached the bus, and Trenny was not there. Several of them went back to look and found nothing. The full search began the next morning, coordinated by a ranger named Jack Linehan, who closed the road between the Clingman's Dome lot and Newfound Gap. Half a dozen dog teams worked the ground, bloodhounds and German shepherds. Two of Trenny's own uncles joined with their own dogs. National Guard helicopters were brought in, but here, again, the fog. The helicopters could not fly until late in the afternoon because the visibility was too poor. Haze and thick foliage smothered the search from above. Hoarfrost and wet leaves made the slopes treacherous. One searcher fell and broke several ribs. Now, I told you I would give you all of the record, including the parts that complicate a tidy mystery. The Gibson case has one. The dogs did pick up her scent. They followed it along the Andrews Bald Trail and toward Forney Creek. Another dog caught a trail near the Appalachian Trail close to the tower and followed it for about 1.5 miles before losing it at Clingman's Dome Road. A scent that ends at a road is not the signature of someone swallowed by wilderness. It is the kind of detail that has led some investigators to believe Trenny may have reached the roadway, and that whatever happened to her happened there, in a vehicle, not in the trees. Searchers did find a few things near where Trenny was thought to have turned off the Forney Ridge Trail. 3 cigarette butts, a single can of beer. Whether any of it had anything to do with her, no one has ever been able to say. It is the kind of debris a popular trail collects, and it is also, maybe, the trace of someone who stopped there. The record cannot tell the two apart, and the timing is brutally tight. She was last seen around 10 minutes to 3, perhaps half a mile from the bus. She was due back at 3:30. That is a 40-minute window on a maintained trail, in sight of the parking lot, with 40 people and a teacher strung out along the same path. The park's own records describe her as a good student with no problems, in good health, but with very little outdoor experience. So I will not force Trenny Gibson into the same shape as the others. Her scent trail points somewhere theirs do not. But strip that away and look at what remains, because the core of it rhymes exactly. A person on a marked, moderate trail, surrounded by people, on the highest ground in the park, in heavy fog, slips out of sight in the brief gap between one glance and the next, and is never seen again. Whatever the ending, the disappearance itself happened in the same window, in the same weather, on the same spine.
40 kids and a teacher on a short loop trail in the fog, and one of them dissolves out of the middle of the group. I've hiked the Smoky Mountain fog. You lose the person in front of you, you lose the sound of your own feet, and you start to understand how this happens and why people who lived here long before us built stories about it.
And they built more than one. Because Spearfinger was not the only thing the Cherokee said ruled these heights. In Mooney's pages, there is a giant called Tzulkalu. The name means, roughly, he has them slanting, understood to refer to his eyes. The English corruption of it is Judicula. He was no minor figure. Tzulkalu was the great lord of the game, the master of all the animals a hunter might pursue. The Cherokee invoked his name in their hunting rites because nothing was taken on these mountains without his leave, and the tradition places him with unusual precision. He was said to live above Tennessee Bald, in a high cleared patch on the slope, with a judgment seat on the peak beside it, from which he looked down on everyone who hunted his game. Early American settlers, not understanding the figure, renamed that peak the Devil's Courthouse. You can find it on a map today on the Blue Ridge Parkway at the edge of this same highland. The Cherokee did not see a devil there. They saw the landlord of the living mountain. As a spirit, Tzulkalu was invisible. He came out late, in the evening and at night, when he knew people were indoors. He kept himself hidden in the mountain and did not wish to be seen. Set that beside the cases for a moment and do nothing more than set it there. The oldest account of this ground describes an unseen master of the heights who moves at the edges of the day, who decides what is taken on these ridges and what is not, and who does not show himself to the people who come up into his country. I am not asking you to believe a giant lives above the Devil's Courthouse. I am pointing out that the people who knew this terrain best did not picture it as empty. They pictured it as owned, as watched, as a place where something decided. There is a longer story Mooney recorded about Tzulkalu, and it tells you how the Cherokee understood the relationship between people and the thing that lived in the high country. In it, a young woman in an old town on the Pigeon River was told by her mother to marry only a good hunter, so the family would always have meat. One dark night, a stranger came courting. He said he was a great hunter, and to prove it, he went out and came back with game, but he would only come to her after dark, and he left before dawn. When at last she saw him in daylight, he was a giant, with his eyes set slanting in his head. He was Tzulkalu, the lord of the game himself, come down out of the mountain to take a human wife. He took her back with him, up into his country in the heights, away from the world of ordinary people. And there is a detail in the wider tradition that I find genuinely unsettling, set against everything else in this story. The Cherokee said that giants like Tzulkalu had come to them once, a whole people of them, twice as tall as common men, with those same slanting eyes. They came from the direction of the setting sun, in the west stayed a while as friends, and then returned to their home far away. A race of enormous hidden people associated with the high mountains and the west, who came among the Cherokee and then withdrew back into a country no one could follow them to. Again, I am not telling you any of that is literally true. I am telling you that the people who lived on this ground for thousands of years filled its heights, in their oldest and most carefully preserved accounts, with beings that take people up and away and do not bring them back. September 25th, 1981. 5 years after Trenny Gibson, Thelma Pauline Melton, who went by Polly, was 58 years old, a woman from Florida who knew these trails. She was hiking in the Deep Creek area on the North Carolina side, down toward Bryson City, with 2 friends. By every account, she was familiar with the route. There was nothing about that afternoon to suggest danger. Around 4 in the afternoon, she was walking a little ahead of her 2 companions. She went over the crest of a low hill, the way you do 100 times on an easy trail, and passed out of their view. It was a matter of seconds. Her friends came up over the same rise, expecting to see her on the path ahead. The path was empty. They called. Nothing answered. They searched the immediate area, then hurried to report her missing to a ranger. A full search followed. It found no trace of her. Polly Melton was familiar with that trail, and there was no indication she had ever stepped off it. She had simply walked over a hill and ceased to exist. That is the detail that removes the easy explanation. With most missing hiker cases, and the park is right to say this, the answer is mundane. People leave the trail. They get disoriented. They are inexperienced or unprepared or unlucky with the weather, and the terrain does the rest. It is rarely a mystery and almost never sinister. But Polly Melton was experienced, on a trail she knew, in view of friends, and gone in the seconds it took to crest a hill. The ordinary explanation runs out of road. The search for her ran the Deep Creek drainage hard. It is not trackless wilderness down there. It is a popular area, threaded with maintained trails, close to the road and the campground, the kind of place families walk on a Sunday afternoon. That is what makes her case sit so strangely in the file. The others vanished high on the exposed crest, in fog, in the most remote-feeling parts of the park. Polly Melton disappeared in friendly, low country on an easy walk, with help close at hand, and the result was the same. No trace, no answer. 40+ years of nothing. She was 58. If she were alive today, she would be past 100. She is not coming back, and the only honest thing to say about where she went is that a hill came between her and the people who loved her, and the far side of it was empty. Which brings me to the part of the Cherokee record I most want to handle honestly, because it is the easiest one to get wrong, and the cheaper versions of this story always do. The Cherokee spoke of the Nunnehi. The name means, roughly, the people who live anywhere. In Mooney's telling, drawn in part from a narrator named James Wofford, they are a spirit race, powerful, usually invisible, sometimes appearing to people as tall, dignified human warriors. There is a related but separate group, the Yunwi-Tsunsdi, the little people, who are smaller, no bigger than children, and the two are often confused. But here is the part that matters. The Nunnehi were not monsters. In the tradition, they are protective, they are helpers, and in story after story, they take people in. A traveler lost in the mountains, a person in danger, a child, is led inside the hills into the townhouses of the Nunnehi and is sheltered there. In one of Mooney's accounts, an entire settlement that was starving and afraid asked to be taken, and the spirit people drew the whole town into the mountain, where it remains. There is one telling Mooney recorded that I cannot get out of my head, and I want to give it to you in detail, because it is the heart of all of this. The Nunnehi came to a Cherokee town and warned the people that hard times were coming. They offered to carry them away, townhouse and all, to live safely inside the mountain. The people agreed. The spirit people told them they would return in 7 days to lift the townhouse with everyone inside it and carry it off. But they gave one instruction. While the townhouse was being carried into the mountain, no one was to make a sound. Stay silent, no matter what, until it was done. On the 7th day there came a sound like thunder, growing louder as it approached. the ground began to shake as the Nunnehi lifted the townhouse from the earth, and some of the people, frightened, cried out. Startled by the scream, some of the spirit people lost their grip, and a piece of the townhouse fell back to the ground. The Cherokee said it became a mound you can still point to, at a place called Setsi. The rest of it, with the people still inside, was carried onto a mountain and changed to solid rock, and the people in it became invisible and immortal, like the Nunnehi themselves. A scream. That is the detail that stops me. In the oldest account these people have of being taken into the mountain, the one thing that goes wrong, the one thing that breaks it, is a human voice crying out in fear at the wrong moment. And in the most haunted of the disappearance cases, the one piece of contested evidence, the thing Harold Key said sent him running toward the woods, was a sharp, high-pitched scream he could not place on the afternoon a child vanished off these heights. I am not connecting those two things for you. I am only setting them on the table beside each other and stepping back. Sit with what that means. The oldest account of these mountains does not only describe things in the fog that hunt. It describes the mountains themselves as a place that takes people and keeps them, and tells that story not as a horror, but almost as a mercy. People go up into the high country and the mountain receives them, and they do not come back to the world they left. The Cherokee did not find that idea alarming the way we do. They found it true. I am not asking you to believe in spirit, people living inside Klingman's dome. I am pointing out something quieter and stranger. The people who knew this ground most intimately for the longest time arrived at a settled belief that this place takes people on these high ridges, and that competence and familiarity were never the protection outsiders assumed. And then, centuries later, the park's own files fill up with exactly that. People on familiar ground, doing nothing wrong, gone in a moment, the mountain closed behind them.
The thing that gets me about the Nunnehi is that it isn't a scary story. It's almost gentle. The mountain takes you and keeps you safe inside it. And I can't decide if that makes it less frightening or a great deal more. But hold on to that thought, because the last case is the one where somebody seemed to have gone looking exactly for this.
March of 2012, 31 years after Polly Melton, and the strangest of all of them. Derek Lueking was 24 years old, from Tennessee. The people who knew him used the same words over and over: dependable, organized, on time. He was the kind of man whose roommate knew something was wrong the moment he didn't show up for work. In the days before he disappeared, Derek had been planning. On his computer, his family later found searches for the Great Smoky Mountains and a booking for a small hotel in Cherokee, North Carolina, just outside the park. He had bought a great deal of survival gear, maps, an axe, a military survival manual, a knife sharpener, a compass, 100 feet of paracord, a headlamp, a fire starter, a multi-tool. He was, by all accounts, a fan of survival television, and he had equipped himself like a man preparing to last a long time in the woods. The hotel security camera caught him checking in. When his family got into the room, they found it strange and quiet. A Bible left on the bed, a bottle of liquor on the floor, things arranged like a man who had been sitting and thinking. His white Ford Escape turned up at the newfound Gap parking area, high on the Crest Road. And here is the part that turns the case inside out. Most of the gear was still in the car, the tent, the sleeping bag. Much of what he had carefully bought to survive left behind. He walked into the mountains in March, having abandoned the things that would have kept him alive, and on the seat he left a note. Accounts of its exact wording vary, but they agree on its meaning. Do not look for me. Do not follow me. Now, I am not going to pretend this is the same as the others, because it isn't, and you deserve the honest version. The note, the planning, the things left behind, all of it points toward a man who chose to disappear. The Rangers had to ask his family the hardest possible question, and the family's answer was not a simple no. So why does Derek Lueking belong in this story at all? Because of where he chose to do it, and because of what happened next. He had over 500,000 acres on the continent to vanish into, and he picked this ridgeline, this fog, this particular ground. And then the same thing happened to him that happened to all the others, whatever his reasons. An extensive search of the wilderness around Newfound Gap turned up no trace of him. None. A man who wanted to be lost came to these mountains to do it, and the mountains obliged completely. Whether Derek walked in to end something or to start over, or for a reason no one will ever know, the result was identical to a 6-year-old's and a schoolgirl and an experienced woman's. He stepped off the edge of the visible world, in the same place, and the record simply stops. His family has never stopped looking. For years, they kept a page online dedicated to finding him, and one of the last messages they left on it reads like something out of the old stories themselves. As you slip farther and farther away, we miss you still, farther and farther away, as though he were not simply gone, but going, still somewhere, into a distance that has no bottom. That is the language of people standing at the edge of these mountains, looking in and understanding that the ground took someone and will not say where. So let me lay out the common thread plainly, the honest version, with nothing added that the record does not support. All of them vanished on the high spine of the same park or its immediate drainages. Most went out of sight in a short, unobserved window, the gap between one glance and the next, not after hours of visible wandering. Several disappeared directly into the fog these mountains are named for, the fog that strips visibility and destroys scent and has defeated search after search up here. In nearly all of them, the physical trace was minimal, or in the Melton case, essentially non-existent. And around the oldest and most documented of them hangs a long institutional silence, a federal file that took 3 denials and 53 years to come into the light. Now let me be just as plain about what the record does not show, because this is where I part ways with most of the channels that tell stories like this. The files do not contain a hidden predator. They do not prove foul play. They do not reveal a cover-up of some known cause. There is no monster in the paperwork. The Gibson scent trail points toward a road and a human explanation that has nothing to do with the others. The Lueking note points toward a choice. These cases do not all share a solution. They share a shape. The honest form of this is not a solved horror. It is a gap, a real and stubborn gap, in the record of a place that swallows people and does not give them back. And that gap is the whole point, because you can hold 2 things at once. You can accept that the terrain explains the how, that vast acreage and sudden fog and steep ground and bad luck and sometimes human intention are enough to make a person disappear without a trace. And you can also notice that the people who lived here longest looked at that same how and built an entire account around it. A stone-skinned hunter that moves in the smoke, an invisible giant who owns the heights and decides what is taken, a race of spirit people who draw the lost into the mountain and keep them. The terrain is the mechanism. The old stories are what human beings made in order to live next to that mechanism, to give a name to the thing the fog does. And I think that is the part the modern official account misses, not because it is wrong, but because it was never trying to do the same job. A ranger's report is built to close a case, to assign a cause, to file a thing away. It has no room for a mountain that takes people. It is not allowed to. The Cherokee account was built to do something else entirely. It was built to let people go on living and hunting and raising children in a place that, every so often, swallowed one of them whole and gave no reason. It did not explain the loss away. It made the loss bearable by making it meaningful. Spearfinger in the smoke, the giant on his judgment seat, the spirit people carrying a townhouse into the rock. Strip the supernatural off all of it, and a hard kernel remains that both accounts agree on completely. This ground takes people. It has always taken people. And the taking does not respect age or experience or preparation or how close you are standing to the parking lot.
3 different figures written down from 3 different people, and every one of them is about the same idea, that these mountains are not empty, that the high ground belongs to something, and that people who go up into it are not always given back. They lived here for thousands of years. They were not stupid. They were paying attention.
Here is where I leave it, because I promised you I would not pretend to an answer I do not have. 4 people, across more than 4 decades, went into these mountains, and most of them never came out, in much the same way, on the same ridgeline, into the same fog. The largest search in the park's history could not find a 6-year-old. A scent trail ended at a road and explained nothing. A woman crested a hill in front of her friends and was gone before they reached the top. A young man left a note and walked into 500,000 acres that closed behind him without a sound. And the only witnesses who were never surprised by any of it have been telling the same story since before this place had a name on any map we use. These are 4 cases out of roughly 28 cold cases the National Park Service lists across the whole system. The fog still rises off these ridges every single morning, and those 4 are only the ones the official list and the public record hold most clearly. The park's own spokespeople will tell you that across the national park system, in a single recent year, more than 2,000 people were at the center of search and rescue incidents. Most of those resolve within hours. A child wanders from a visitor center and is reunited with a parent. A day hiker takes a wrong fork and is found by dark. The system works overwhelmingly, and the mountains give almost everyone back. But fold into those numbers the handful that do not resolve. The ones where there is no footprint, no scent past a certain point, no body, no answer, and you are left with a small, stubborn residue that the most advanced search techniques in the world cannot account for. A residue concentrated here on one high ridge. The balls where some of them disappeared are a short walk from a paved parking lot, and people stroll out to them by the thousands, in good weather, never thinking about it. Most of them come back. Almost all of them come back. I do not know what takes the ones who don't. I have shown you everything the record holds and everything the oldest accounts say, and the space between those 2 things is exactly as wide as it was when we started. Maybe that space is just terrain and weather and statistics and the private decisions of people we never really knew. Maybe it is something the Cherokee understood and we have only forgotten. I cannot close that gap for you. I am not sure it is meant to be closed.
If you made it all the way here, leave me a comment below, so I know who stayed up until the end. Subscribe if you want more of this, and tell me where you are watching from. And if the woods ever go quiet around you, the kind of quiet where you cannot hear your own footsteps, turn around and go back the way you came.